In this final portion of the presentation, we'll review the results that Wasko and Faraj obtained in their research on social capital and knowledge contribution in electronic networks of practice. Wasko and Faraj obtained results that are, alas, underwhelming. Numerous hypotheses turn out to be unsupported by their results, and what significant correlations they do find are weak at best. Now, one could take an alternative view here. A number of Wasko and Faraj's results run counter to expectation or even common sense, as we'll see, thus inspiring further investigation to find out, well, wait a minute, if things aren't running the way we thought they would, what's actually happening here? A number of the results from Wasko and Faraj's research are more remarkable for the failures than for the successes in supporting any of the hypotheses. For instance, let's look at desire to help and knowledge contribution. In this area, Wasko and Faraj identified only a 0.13 correlation, which in their terms approached significance. However, if you look at the numbers, when they say approach significance, they mean the significance was, the p-value was better than 0.10, but it still didn't reach the 0.05 level. So really, approach significance is a gentle way of saying it's not a significant result. And even if it had been, the correlation was only a 0.13 correlation, which, if you think about what this means practically, is rather counterintuitive. A desire to help others didn't actually produce better help or more help in this particular research investigation. Similarly, much of what was expected with expertise and tenure also failed to be supported by the data. The only significant correlation to come out of these areas was a small correlation between tenure and volume. Numerically, that correlation was only 0.23. It was statistically significant, but the correlation was still very weak. This number indicates that participants who have worked as lawyers or in the legal field longer did tend to produce more responses. But again, the correlation was only 0.23. It's not a terribly strong correlation. Perhaps more significantly, the other areas showed no significant correlations. Longer tenure did not produce more helpful contributions. And expertise did not correlate with either a greater number of contributions or, perhaps most surprisingly, with more helpful contributions. Now, one would think if we have expert participants, they'd be giving more helpful results. But apparently not in this study. So what's the explanation for that? Perhaps the smart old guys among the participants are just greedy and don't want to share their information. Maybe the holders of this greater knowledge, if indeed experience and expertise translate into better knowledge, maybe the holders of that knowledge don't want to release helpful parcels of it in fear that it would decrease their competitive advantage and thus not be worth their time. Maybe younger, less experienced network members who don't feel they have as much expertise are much more willing to share what little they know in an effort to be helpful and maybe to obtain information from others. That's all speculation, though. All that Wasko and Faraj have to show here is that there is no significant correlation between expertise and knowledge contributions, and that the connection between tenure and knowledge contributions is tenuous at best. Wasko and Faraj did obtain significant correlations between expertise and tenure and commitment and reciprocity. Commitment and reciprocity, those senses on the network. Interestingly, however, those elements correlated negatively. Those with more expertise felt less committed to the network and felt less of a sense of mutual indebtedness to other members of the network. Similarly, tenure. Those who had served in the field longer also felt less commitment to the network and less of a sense of indebtedness to the network. Now, again, like the other numbers that Wasko and Faraj found, these correlations were not strong, but they exist, and of the few that did turn out to be significant, these did turn out to be significant. In other words, we can count on the fact that they were not just aberrations or products of chance. Still, it seems odd that these features should come up negative. However, whatever might be causing the more experienced and more the more experienced and those with greater expertise members of the community to not feel commitment and reciprocity, it apparently doesn't matter for knowledge contribution, because In this area, looking at commitment and reciprocity, the authors found either insignificant or weakly negative correlations with helpfulness and volume. So we therefore cannot conclude that a loyal participant who feels a shared obligation with network members would be any more helpful or any more prolific than a member who feels no obligation to other participants, or a member who would hardly notice if the network disappeared tomorrow as a measure of commitment. As we can see, commitment to helpfulness, it's statistically significant, but still a weak relationship. Reciprocity to volume was also statistically significant, but strangely was weakly negative. So if anything, the sense of mutual indebtedness that the participants in this study had to the network actually correlated with fewer responses. A strange result. Overall, even the significant correlations that the authors found might be overwhelmed by a strong statistical wind. Network centrality showed the strongest correlations, 0.46 with volume and 0.33 with helpfulness. Both of those were statistically significant. None of the other significant correlations the authors found break the 0.30 threshold. Now, these correlations may be better than nothing, but they don't offer much for designers of electronic networks of practice to hang their hat on with any expectation of strong return on investment. Now, one might offer practical advice to network sponsors on this basis. They might say you should foster an active core of participants who will build centrality. You should find people who will form that oft-mentioned critical mass of users who will drive knowledge sharing in the network. One might also make a recommendation to emphasize the reputational benefits of participation. However, on such weak correlations, network sponsors will always have to be attentive to other confounding factors. Looking at weaknesses and strengths of the study, in terms of weaknesses, the most significant one would be what appears to be exaggeration. The authors seem in places to overstate the case for support of the model they outlined. One researcher's qualified support for most of our hypothesized relationships is just another researcher's failure to reject the null hypothesis. As we see from this table, most in the quote the authors give seems to exaggerate the case for support. If we break the hypotheses down by helpfulness and by volume of contribution, we see here the correlations with each one of the 7 elements of the model. If we break this down, we find that there were significant relationships at a p-value of less than 0.05 in exactly half of the 14 tested relationships. And of those, 2 of those relationships, commitment to helpfulness and reciprocity to volume, actually turned out to be significantly negative relationships, the opposite of what the hypotheses proposed. So when we look at the breakdown of the 14 sub-hypotheses, we find only 5 that are supported out of 14 in the direction they expected. And all of the other significant correlations, almost all of the significant correlations, are minor at best. On the positive side, the authors do offer a reasonable discussion of the results that run counter to expectations and to prior research. For example, they suggest that the possible lack of significant expertise, or a lack of a correlation between expertise and helpfulness, may come from the differences in how expertise is defined from study to study. Wasko and Faraj also speculate that the absence of a clear connection between reciprocity and helpfulness, which contradicts prior research in face-to-face settings, may stem from the lack of face-to-face interaction and any direct personal reciprocity in electronic networks, the realm they're studying. Wasko and Faraj also rightly note the weakness of even their strongest finding, the significance of centrality. Wasko and Faraj acknowledge that centrality may not be an independent variable, it may instead be a dependent variable, something that results from, rather than predicting, knowledge contribution. Overall, the authors offer a well-structured and rigorous research project. The disappointing conclusions reflect not necessarily a failing of the researchers, but simply the complicated and still not fully understood nature of how self-organized networks manage to make knowledge sharing happen, even when the typical motivations of knowledge management in the market aren't there. So really, this research invites further research in this very interesting field. Thank you for listening. Your questions and comments are welcome.